Well, it's not too often we get a chance on the OHL podcast to talk to somebody who played for Bert Templeton and Ted Nolan, even though it was Ted Nolan for a brief time. But that's the case this week as we welcome Dave Lylyk to the podcast. Great to have you, Dave. You're in your hotel room in Quebec, but you're still making time for us on the pod. Really appreciate that.
Thanks, Mike. It's I was honored when you reached out, and I do have some good stories. I played for some legendary coaches and had a lot of great teammates along the way. So I'm looking forward to this time with you.
I have no doubt that you do. And I did a little bit of recon myself just to find out what people are saying about Dave Lylyk. So we'll see where all of this goes. But you mentioned that on the trip to Quebec, you were able to catch up on some previous episodes. And I guess maybe it was a bit of a trip down memory lane for you.
It is. I mean, it's funny that you say that because I'm more connected with a lot of the former teammates today than I was the first 10 years out of the game. So Washer, Joel Washcrook, I listen to, and he's just, I mean, he's comedy anywhere you bump into him. I coached Keenan in some summer hockey, and I never played with Joel, but we're good buddies. Tony Obb I played with in Phoenix. 99 2000. I listened to that podcast, and it was even just hearing Tony's stories because I'm a few years younger. I was a fan of that era of Lindros and Sault Ste. Marie. Saw Tony fight Eric in Oshawa. I was probably 14 or 15 at the time, and then having the opportunity to play with these guys after, it's good to hear their stories as well.
It sounds like we cut our teeth as fans in the same era, because you probably heard me mention to Tony that I was a kid going to Kitchener Rangers games when the Sault Ste. Marie Greyhounds would come in, and Tony was public enemy number one for the fans because he was such a bruiser out there.
Yeah, I mean, I was such a fan of the OHL the few years prior to playing in the league because of Eric Lindros being right there in my hometown. I was in Whitby. Mike Torch is another name I played with in senior hockey, and I lined up through the night to get tickets to the Kitchener-Oshawa OHL finals, and seeing Steve Rice, another former teammate, and Torch, and then going to Copps Coliseum with my Bantam team. Kevin Weeks was on, and our Toronto Red Wings team went to Copps Coliseum to watch that epic Memorial Cup final with Oshawa and Kitchener.
Everybody that I talked to, Dave, I don't think I'm going to get a much different answer from you, but that was the Memorial Cup, was it not? And frankly, I think it put junior hockey on the map in this country.
It was unbelievable. I mean, and you can go down the list, the Dale Craigwells and the Ian Frasers, and these were people, players and people in my community that I looked at like celebrities, really. They were like, it was at that level in Oshawa at the time in the OHL, and all you really had, Mike, back then was that CHL magazine. You'd see a guy on the cover of it, and that was my Instagram for hockey. You just couldn't wait for a new publication, and you'd read it cover to cover over and over again, and then you'd go to see these guys live. And I think they had a lot more nostalgia because we didn't have the access we do today with social media.
I'd forgotten all about that magazine. That's a great reference. And, Dave, I always like to do these chronologically because I'm a little bit anal that way, but I can't help but think about what you said at the very beginning, that, it was 10 years after your playing days that some of these relationships started to form and blossom, and that you keep them to this day, maybe more so than you did in the early days after playing. And I wonder, when you look back on a hockey career, and you had some travels. I mean, you must have had a well-packed suitcase all the time in your hockey career. But when you look back on it now, how do you view it? I mean, I get the sense it might be more about the people you met than the games you played.
It's a great question. Suitcase is a real word, and and I'm not embarrassed. I was for a little while. Like, you could travel around, you're trying to fit in, and then I look back at it now in my late 40s, and I wouldn't trade it in for anything. The cities I got to live in, the people I got to meet, the experiences I had in all the different cities in the United States, it was a ride. I went back to college after, and I wouldn't trade it in. When I see now in the work world how expensive it is for a family to go on vacation, experience Phoenix, or go to San Antonio and see the Riverwalk, and having lived in all these places and playing against Nashville and Memphis, and it was really cool. And I got to do it playing hockey, and met a lot of great people along the way. Back to your original comment, Having kids really kind of gets you around the rinks, and you run into, ex-teammates. Brad Brown, I've seen in Ottawa, and Washer, I talked about, and the list goes on and on and on. I remember Derek Grant, who I played with for a number of years. He was down in North Carolina and Roanoke, and our kids were the same age at the O1 level. I coached for about 10 years between my son and daughter, and you bump into everybody in the rinks. Everybody's got kids, different age groups, playing rep hockey, whether it be male or female, and you just connect like that. The same thing Washer and Tony said. You bump into guys and you pick up right where you left off.
One of the names that I picked up in doing a little bit of research before this conversation is one you haven't mentioned yet, and you would have been with them just for that brief moment of time towards the end of your junior career in Guelph, but that's Jeff O'Neill, and I understand the two of you are still pretty tight.
Yeah, Jeff was he was the best man at my wedding. We had a great friendship. We had that year. That was probably, if I could kind of categorize my junior career as a late bloomer. As when we went to the Soo at 16, it took me a couple years to grow up, but everything that happened in Guelph happened for a reason, and we had that run. We had a great team. Mike Kelly and Craig Hartsburg and Jeff and Todd Bertuzzi was there. Jeff he was the best player, or one of the best players in the Canadian Hockey League. We hit it off the ice and on the ice, and remain still good friends. Just golfed with him a week or so ago. So I enjoy following him on the air on TSN there. So he's doing a great job. I'm happy for him. Yeah, we stay in touch.
And I wonder if you ever take a moment, Dave, to chirp him for a take he had on his broadcast.
What's that? Sorry.
Do you ever take him? Do you ever chirp him? Hey, O-Dog, that was a terrible take on whatever.
I mean, we go back and forth, and he knows. He calls himself out more than anything. He's not really. I mean, he does such a great job. He's the personality of that team, and there's a couple times he references his friends or whatever, and we've talked about it after. And he knows the lines, what can be said on air, off air. We've all grown up now. We have kids, and like when we were kids, we were 18, 19. And we had a lot of fun.
When you're a part of a team like that team in Guelph, Dave, because you mentioned Jeff O'Neill was at the time one of the best players in the Canadian Hockey League, and you're not blowing smoke. That's a fact. When you've got a player of that caliber on your team, what does it do for the rest of the team? What's it like in practice and then in game situations?
It was going there was a dream come true to end your hockey career, to see the work ethic of Todd, Jamie Wright, Jeff. We can go on and on and on, Ruminadur. But it all started with Craig that year. I know they had some different coaches, and Jeff was there at the beginning when it was a little rockier times in Guelph, and then they built the team over a few years. But to answer your question, the work ethic from day one when I arrived there, it was in the fall. It was at the highest level from Craig Hartsburg down, and he held the big guys accountable, and the rest fed down, and that just went on and through the entire year and the playoffs. I had made some mental notes just to talk a bit about that, because I thought, as good as the coaches are that I've had around my travels, I thought Craig, he made you aware of what a day was going to be like, or what next week was going to be like. So it wasn't a surprise. He would call it fitness rather than a bag skate. So it was just, you knew it was coming. You put the hard work in, similar to like an NFL schedule. Then you'd work on specialty teams and get into the weekends, and it worked. I think we had 2 home losses that year. And talking about discipline, the 2 home losses, one came to Sudbury, and it's been a long, long time, but I believe a couple of the top guys had skipped school probably for the first time that whole year. And Sudbury was a powerhouse, and they were coming in town. And I don't think we had a home loss yet. But to the rules of the team, they got sat out, and we lost. And it was just kind of an eye opener, and at a good time in the year, that nobody's bigger than anybody. And it just bonded the team. Not that individual event, but it just let you know that team was serious. It was a spectacular year right to the end.
It sounds like that's kind of all you really want from a coach. isn't it? You want that, you want the understanding of what's expected of you, and then you talk about, the way it's broken down, so what's going to be happening, and it's your job then as the player just to follow what is expected of you.
Yeah, Craig and Craig Hartsburg, Mike Kelly, they over communicated. You were in their office all the time, good or bad. They'd ask you how you're doing. There was just that constant contact. And they did it with everybody. I would have been in that bottom half of but they treated everybody the same. Everybody bought in, and it just kept growing and growing. We added a couple pieces. I think when I went there, I was the only non-drafted Storm player on that entire roster. And that says a lot about the commitment they've made to their players. And then we added Pat Barton came back. I believe from the East Coast League at the end of the year, and we traded for Neil Fuster and Stefan Soulier, and that was basically about it. Andrew Norman, I think, came from the Sioux, and that was the team we made a run with.
Yeah, and you kind of know that you're there to make a run, right?
Yeah, and I was 19, and I just wanted to contribute any way I could. Whether it was to get in a fight, I was working with Pat Barton on the bag. I wasn't naturally a fighter, but you had to find a way to contribute. We just had such a broad team of talent and toughness, and we had some great young guys too. Brian Wiesenberg and Jason Jackman, Dwayne Hay. So it was just a good all-around team. But Craig and Mike never let anybody get above of what the goal was. And I mean, we lost. I'll be honest, it haunts you when we talk with buddies about it. But it was essentially the Brian Berard show down in Detroit in the finals, and he single-handedly, it was kind of Bobby Orrish, to be honest with you. He had a phenomenal playoffs, and we lost to Detroit in the OHL finals. They went on to that Memorial Cup. I guess it'd be '95.
How much does that, I mean, because you came so close, Dave, how much does that still stay with you?
Oh my God. If you've never met anybody that's been so close to Memorial Cups, I could run you through it. So it's going to the Sioux as a 16-year-old. I'm sure you're aware they were hosting the Memorial Cup that year. So going there, they had a team. I think they had 9 guys in pro camp. I wasn't ready yet, to be honest with you, at 16. That team, when you talk about being a fan, had just come off. You were talking to Tony about it. Back-to-back Memorial Cup appearances with Tony. Then Tony left. So I mean, when I go there, there's no room to play, and they are absolutely star-studded. And you're at 16. You want to work hard, but you're happy to be there. So getting traded to North Bay, it was probably, it was a nice thought that Sean Ember and I went there. I was a 16-year-old, because you know that somebody else wants you and you're going to get to play, but it stings. You watch it on TV. They won the Memorial Cup at home, and then and then you grow and you develop, and a couple years go by, and North Bay had gone to the Memorial Cup. They didn't win, but they went to Quebec, and then to lose in Guelph, to have, when you're only in the league for 3 years, and then to have an opportunity to see 3 Memorial Cups within a year or two with the organizations. Yeah, it's close. It's a hard championship to get to, that's for sure, when you're only in the league for a few years.
So you mentioned before, and we just touched on the Sioux, you there for basically that cup of coffee, but as a 16-year-old from Whitby to Sault Ste. Marie, Eric Lindros didn't go there. How did it feel as a 16-year-old kid saying, okay, I'm going to the furthest north team in the Ontario Hockey League?
I was all in. Like I said, I've had 25 years plus to think about it. And would you do things differently? You would, but if you were 16 again, would you do things differently? It's you go there and they're 5 or 6 lines deep of Aaron Gavey, Ralph Internubo, Drew Bannister. Like, you could go on and on and on. So you're rotating with some rookies to get some game time, and you're happy to be there. Don't have anything bad to say. It was a first-class organization. You were thrilled to be there and see. We did the summer training in Kitchener, and they were talking about three-peat all summer long. That was the goal. And they had that super series with Peterborough to host the Memorial Cup, and they won that. Actually, they lost the OHL championship to Peterborough, but won the super series to host the Memorial Cup. And to win it on home ice, I was thrilled for them, because you felt like you were a part of it. That's who drafted you. So it stung for a long time, Mike, but you get over it. I've used it, to be honest with you, some of those things when you're that young. I'm using those skills now. Like, it develops you in my career, recruiting, how to deal with people. So it's all a learning process. The same thing in North Bay. If Bert was still here, I was mad for a long time the way we worked with each other, and he was a great guy, but I probably had some choice words for him. He had his ways. He was very, very stubborn, and if it didn't fit in, and it didn't always for me, then I was frustrated. But then looking back, if I could have a beer with him today, because he liked to have the odd beer, is you'd thank him, because there was things you didn't know that he was teaching you. He just was. It was very old school. Like, you talk to Washer and they're talking about Mav and Killer, and that was Bert. Like, those guys were the pioneers of, you kind of have to do it and figure it out on your own. Whereas I felt Mike and Craig, they approached it a little bit differently, and I was a little more mature, and you could figure out, okay, now I know what to do. Now I've got control of it. But you're on your own when you're going into that league at that era.
Bert was about as hard-nosed as they came in this league. And even as a guy on the media side, intimidating as hell, Dave. I'll just be honest about it.
Yeah.
I would say I said the same thing about Pete DeBoer when I covered him in Kitchener, for crying out loud. But you talk about that relationship that you can reflect back on now and perhaps look at a little differently, and would love to have that beer. What was it like for you then, with a presence and a stubbornness like that of Bert Templeton's?
You relied on your teammates that trusted Bert, because you have to build that trust. So I remember, you talked to Dennis Bombi and Jeff Chevalier, and they had been with him for a couple of years when they were winning, before they traded Chad Penny and Wade Gibson to the Sioux. So I got there in a little bit of a downslide, and you had to really rely on your teammates. But Bert was, all the stories. He sat at the back of the bus. He'd have his cooler beers, and so it was the only team I've been a part of in my life where, the vets would sit closer to the front of the bus, because the coach sat at the back, and he had his downtime. And, it was funny. I look back I would probably be more similar to Bert than I know, coaching. Like, he would have a beer with Mav after a Belleville game, or you'd have buddies on Belleville, and, their team would be hanging around. They had really great relationships, but there was nobody more intense. If you're scoring or doing the little things, you were rewarded. And I was trying to figure myself out. Like, in my minor hockey days, I'm going to be scoring. Should I be fighting? Like, it just takes your time to figure out what it is that you can do to contribute on your timeline. And so again, it's just, you look back on it, you reflect, and but yeah, no ill, nothing like that. I learned a lot from Bert.
I get the sense that when you play for Bert Templeton, not fighting is not an option. I mean, at some point, you're going to have to stand up and be counted for.
Yeah, and that wasn't the issue. My struggle with, when so in the early 90s, you're over 6 foot. If you're not scoring, you got to be doing something. And I kept waiting for that offensive game to come, and then you're caught in the middle. Whereas if you had a regret, if you could do it over again, would I want to be fighting game in and game out? No. But just going out, and the game was so different than today, as you know, from being around it and all your other guests, that it was tough. It was a tough game, and every team was built with scorers. You could go on against some teams that have 5 or 6 tough guys, and you had to. So with Bert, to get back on that, probably, like, if you went out and you showed him early that was a part of your makeup, then he would. Or if you're scoring 50 goals, he doesn't mind that either.
You get me thinking, though, Dave, because this just came up in a recent conversation about the game today. And I love the way you just described it when you played it, right? You might have a team with 5 or 6 tough guys on it. You can almost pick those layers of teams. Whereas today, good luck finding the guy on the team that can't skate. Good luck finding the guy on the team that doesn't have hands to at least some degree. How do you feel about the game from when you played it compared to what it's become today?
It's a great question. I'm kind of torn. I love the skill. I love seeing Matthews and Marner. I love that excitement. But I miss the characters. So and I don't want to age myself, but in that era, you had the highest skilled dominating 1-2 lines, and the same with the D, great goalie. And then it was, very typical to like a video game. And you had that bottom 2 lines, and the bottom D could be flat out scary tough. And, you go into Sudbury on a Saturday night, or you go to Windsor, and all the characters from that era, it was tough. And if the games got away, or they would just be tough from start to finish. I think there's got to be kind of an in-between. I heard you talking to Tony about it. Fighting shouldn't be gone from the game. Like but there's the staged fighting is probably, that's probably, but the toughness, being able to police the situation, I think was a better game, to be honest with you. And that I think there's a hybrid somewhere in the middle, where there was some policing going on. There was a lot more respect. If you had a Jeff O'Neill running around and somebody came to bother them, then you had a Ruben Nadur stepping in, and I like that part of it. But yeah, every player in junior now, right down to the fourth line, skates like Sidney Crosby. I was going to touch on that when I scouted for Guelph for a little bit, and I was like, I can't figure this out. Like the lowest kids on depth charts are skating at the highest level because they're doing all of the year-round training. It's incredible.
Yeah, it's crazy. And you got me thinking of something else when you talk about going into Sudbury on a Saturday night and knowing who the characters are, which makes me think of rivalries, Dave. And if I'm being honest with you, you mentioned the CHL magazine was the Instagram of back in the day. I think that players are so connected to one another in the game today. They might have come up together through minor or whatever. I don't find the rivalries quite the same. Who was the biggest for you when you played? Was it the Sudbury Wolves when you were in North Bay?
It was 100%. And even in the Sioux, I just found myself, this is the silliness of being immature when you're 16. So I go into an exhibition game in Sudbury with the Sioux. It was kind of funny, actually. They had a guy writing an article, and he wanted to get the true experience of the game and dress. So we were all told pre-game that this gentleman's going to be playing. I don't even remember actually if it was with the Sioux or North Bay at this time. I'm pretty sure it was with the Sioux. And somebody laid him out. And we were told before the game that he's a reporter, he's pretty weak, but he wanted to, in his book or his article, he wanted to write about the experience of playing on the ice in an OHL game. So that caused a huge ruckus. And then the same game, I'm sure you're familiar with the guy I'm going to mention. So I'm 16. I was like, I got to make this team. There's no way in hell you're going to make it. You're not going to score a hat trick this game. So I've lined up and I fought Gary Coupel, who I knew the year prior. He was playing in Muskoka and I was in St. Mike. So I knew who he was. He was a tough guy. And he beat me up pretty good. I had a goose egg on the front of my forehead. The trainers, I went into the locker room and they had to cut the foam out of the front of the helmet, and the helmet just slid on perfectly over the goose egg. And I finished the game. I was just like, you just got to do what you got to do. And it triggered another story. Same thing. I got sent down from Binghamton in the American League to Charlotte in the East Coast League. And then again, I don't know what makes me think who's the toughest guy on the team. I gotta sort this out right now and get a contract. And I saw you interviewed Jason Clark. I don't know if it was recently but I saw it on your Instagram. So I'm lining up with him, same thing, center ice. And he did a number on me. He closed. By the time I had gotten to the penalty box, both my eyes were closed, completely shut. So I exit the game, signed, coach was happy. And it was funny though, I couldn't drive my car. I had to leave it at the rink that night, which was he was a tough customer. I probably could have scouted the lineup a little bit better and went midway down, but I just made that mistake a couple times.
I'll tell you what. Yeah, we had Clarkey on the podcast because people were asking for somebody from the former Niagara Falls Thunder, and that's who we landed on. But it's interesting because I was thinking about this when you told the goose egg story, Dave. And in talking to Clarkey, he was he was very honest about kind of where he's at today, considering the way
Yeah.
he played the game. How does the mature adult Dave Lylyk feel about the kid that had the helmet modified so he could fit it over a goose egg and got back out there on the ice?
Yeah, it's a tough question because I got a 20-year-old son who he liked fighting more than I did. He was playing junior B recently. He went to a couple camps, and he's done now. He's in school, and he liked it. But that part of it, I mean, it was different. I was trying to do what I had to do, and nowadays my advice was to him that there's a time and a place. It's defending teammates. At the time when he was in his camps, it's defending yourself. Same thing Washer and the guys have been saying to you. So that I don't mind him doing it just for the sake of it, or anybody doing it just for the sake of it. I don't agree with, but I always think there's something to be said for defending a teammate or yourself if it's the right situation, and kind of contradicts what I was saying. I was trying to make a team and trying to impress people that have been doing this for decades, coaches and GMs, and at 16 you need that guidance. You need somebody to kind of, I grew up with Wayne Primo, and I often think about in Whitby, how cool was it that he had Keith that already has been through all of this, seen everything good and bad in Niagara Falls. And it's pretty cool when you have, you're not just coming into the league as a really good player and a fan, but to have kind of that guidance counselor to kind of, this is how it's going to be. This is what you need to be prepared for. And this is how you handle these situations. And so it was a different time for sure.
How did you first arrive in the game, Dave? And at what point along your journey did you realize that the Ontario Hockey League was a very real possibility for you?
Another good question. I would say I was pretty average going through minor hockey, and then at that 14, that minor Bantam, major Bantam, just really, really developed and felt passionate about it, and really successful. And playing junior B at 15, having over a point a game, it's no different than any walk of life. Confidence is the biggest attribute you can have, and when you don't have it, things can go, whether you're working, doing what you do, or playing hockey. So when things were good, when I was playing junior B that year, you're getting the power play time, you're getting the ice time. Things are really good. And then it's the adversity as a young kid and sitting on the bench, and having to, if you haven't dealt with that before, it takes its toll on you. You gotta grind through it and you learn. I just didn't learn. It took me a few years to adapt to that, and then figure out not to take it personally. How you gonna deal with that situation?
We kind of joked earlier about suitcase, but you said it's a real term. And when you look at Dave Lylyk's hockey DB page, you see all of the teams on there. What's it like being traded, and do you ever get used to it?
You don't get used to it. It definitely helps you develop thicker skin. You get if you love something, it's very similar. You don't get traded in the PGA, but you can be sent down to the Corn Ferry Tour. You can live out of a trunk of a car. You're doing what you love to do, and you're trying to find a place. You go through that. I wouldn't want you to print it off because you'd run out of paper, but you're going through that list, and you can see where you've had a great situation. Like in San Antonio, I had a lot of confidence. Still real young. Should have been playing pro hockey at 19, 20 and in the States. Probably should have been in school, but I waited until I was done with hockey and then went back to school. But I thought I was a better player playing 10 years of senior hockey against Corey Eisen and Yed Kelly Corpse on, and playing against those guys for a decade after I was 25 till 35 than I was when I was playing junior and pro, just as a player. Skill on the ice, confidence, going to a few Allen Cups with some good teams, and having fun. That's the biggest part of it. So it's it's just an evolving process. And then you take all of those things from your travels, the growing of the thick skin, and you apply them to your life. And that's kind of what I've done with my work career, and just keep grinding. And it helped me a lot coaching too, taking bits and pieces, coaching AAA hockey for boys and girls.
Keep grinding sounds like a hockey term, but when you look back on your resume in the game, Dave, it sounds like that's exactly what you were doing. You were kind of grinding out that living as a hockey player.
That's exactly what it was. You know, you want to have the opportunity to play, and you might be on some weaker teams, but then you want to have, when you get a taste of being on a Guelph versus St. Marie, you want to win. And my whole thing, when I finally quit in 2000, was I wanted a ring more than anything from the game. That's kind of what I wanted. I wanted to contribute and be a part of something that was a championship. And Tony and I were teammates in Phoenix in 2000 there in the West Coast League, and we won a championship. And that was it was an easy way for me to say it's time to go back to school. You know, my dad pulled me aside years before that, basically, and said the NHL is just getting further and further away. Although you think you're talented and everything else, but you're just go down there and have fun. You're playing in some really cool cities, and enjoy the game for what it's worth. And you're getting to see some really unique landscape across the country. And that's what I did for a few years. And I was fortunate enough to be on a team in Phoenix similar to that Guelph. It was just really deep. We had about 9 guys that had a cup of coffee in the NHL, and it was a great run. And we got our rings, and it's great memories.
And where's the ring now?
The ring is at home in the sock drawer, to be honest.
In the sock drawer.
It's usually it gets moved around. Sometimes I'll wear it in the car. I don't wear it in public, but I'll wear it on the car drive to work or whatever, and it goes back in the sock drawer.
I love it, Dave. We've talked to so many people with the opportunity through this podcast about the bond that is really forged when you play on a championship team. Like, we've already talked about all these great relationships, and I get it from the time in the game, but when you have that opportunity to win the ultimate prize, that championship, that ring, there's something about the bond that forms with that team.
Yeah, it lasts forever. And I mean, no joking aside, I think the 93 Leafs, they celebrate like that with the conference final. Like, I think it's even like a strong run, if you will. Like the Guelph team's got a strong bond, and there's a dozen of us that live in the Guelph area still from that Guelph team back in the 90s. The Phoenix team, Kevin Epp is a player agent who I make a point of seeing him and his family whenever I'm in Vancouver. So that's going on, 23 years, 22 years. And Facebook is something that is kind of gone on the wayside in the means of social media. I think for me, its purposes, it's kind of my hockey stay connected. Everybody's got an account saying happy birthday, reaching out to guys. I'm connected with so many guys and that's when that 10-year gap I talked about as well. So you're in the rinks from the kids, and then you got on Facebook, and you're just like, you're seeing all your former teammates' lives that 40, 50 years ago, you'd have to travel to see them face to face. Or so it's really cool to see. I haven't seen Tony since 2000, but I know everything that's going on in his life and his kids' hockey, and you check in and say hi once in a while, and it's pretty cool.
I'm embarrassed to say this, Dave, because I consider myself to be a little bit old school. When I started in radio, there was no internet. It was just starting to become a thing, okay? But Facebook, that's how I got Tony Obb onto this podcast, because I saw Washer interacting with Tony. I'm like, wait a minute, I'd love to have Tony on the podcast. And so I'm going to connect with you and make it official there, and I'm going to find more of these guests to get on this podcast.
You'll have about 3 years worth of material going through my friend list. No,
okay.
It's so cool to see, how guys are doing, and getting married and having kids, and likewise for my family, with my wife and my son, and my daughter has a cycling career now that everybody likes to follow and comment on. And traveling around the world. So it's really cool for people to check in and do the same thing likewise.
I want to ask one more question about that ring, because you mentioned it in the sock drawer. You'll wear it in the car once in a while, not in public. When you put it on, obviously there's a reason. Is it nostalgia? Like, what do you think about when that ring slides onto your finger?
Just what it took that year with that group of guys to achieve it. And, there's rings that you can win at different levels, whether it be the NFL, the NHL. When you win a championship, even guys would say this in the American Hockey League, you go through a path with a group of guys and you're just creating memories all the way along. And it's just special. It's something to look at and to say, wow, what a year that was. And it brings back great memories. And it's just a feeling of skating around a stadium with people in it and raising a cup above your head at any level. And it can be minor hockey, but it's just a special thing for a group of guys. And it's very unique to hockey to have that piece of jewelry before they got all crazy like they have in Tampa. And I think the tops flip and open and stuff now. But yeah, it's just really, really cool. And it's a memory bank from a special year.
So yours isn't going to be on an auction block somewhere for 100,000 plus.
I don't think it's worth it, or it ever will be. So I think it's probably worth more to me. And maybe there's some more down the road with coaching. I really enjoyed it, and was pretty passionate about being on the bench for the last 10 years.
When you mentioned West Coast League before, I can't believe I almost let it slip my mind. A real rarity, if not an oddity, in Major Junior. We talk about the Sioux to North Bay to Guelph. Oh, wait a minute. Right at the very end, you're in the dub with Regina. Like, how did that happen?
So it's interesting. So the back then, the Western Hockey League was allowed 3 overagers, and the OHL was only having 2. So I was down in Charlotte till about Christmas time, and really, really good team. They were stacking up, and playing time was getting more limited. You only had 10 forwards, I think, you could dress, as opposed to the 12. Anyways, Rich Preston, who coached he coached Regina with, he was old former teammates with John Marks, the coach of Charlotte. And John just asked me, do you want to go give this a try and leave your car, leave everything here? And I was like, yeah, I want to play. So I flew out there and literally got off the plane, played a couple games, I think, at home. And then we went on a 21-day road trip, pure Western Hockey League stuff. And I remember we went, Swift Current or Lethbridge, right up to Prince George, all the way down. You're going through Kamloops into Spokane, the whole trip. It was a great experience. They had a few of us that were older guys. When we got back after Christmas, it just wasn't. They were asking us if we wanted to go elsewhere, trading off a few of the older guys. They had a bunch of really, really talented young guys. Kyle Calder, trying to think of the other kid's name, Morris, who was a defenseman, had a great NHL career. Derek Morris, he's retired now. They had a bunch of these young guys, and they were very respectful. They were asking 3 or 4 of us if they could trade, and I had just had enough at that point. And said, I'm not from here. It was a great experience, and came back and finished the season in Ontario and went back to Charlotte again that next fall. It was a different world out there, though. You got to see more faces that you'd heard of. So it's Rocky Thompson, Wade Belak, like you're skating around going, oh, I've heard of these guys. And, you're warming up separately because of buffoonery that happened 20 years prior where guys were stealing each other's nets. And so that was really weird. I'm going out there. I was like, why are we warming up an hour before the game? And they're like, well, we're on the road. They warm up separately. It's pretty unique.
What was the craziest experience you were ever a part of, be it pre-game, during a game? Because you're still in that era that we've touched on where, line brawls or bench clearing brawls weren't necessarily uncommon.
Yeah, they happen. I'm just trying to think of anything specific. I mean, it's there was an exhibition game in Hershey, Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania. I was in Binghamton, and Ryan Vandenbush. There was a little bit of a line brawl. The Ferrero, Chris and Peter Ferrero, they were super skilled players, and one of them had instigated with a spear, and it kind of started a bit of a line brawl. And it was the I don't know what the example would be. It was the goriest fight I've seen. Ryan beating up Ryan Sittler, who was Philadelphia's first round pick. I think he was 7th overall, and it was messy. I actually don't know if Ryan played much after that, but Sittler, I mean, Ryan Vandenbush was as tough as they come. But I mean, that was pretty gruesome. It just seemed like line brawls were pretty popular. I had only experienced one bench clearing brawl. It was actually in junior B. And yeah, it's probably the scariest thing, because you don't know, there's only 3 refs, and they're kind of standing off, and so you're policing yourself. I was trying to think if that was it was in Welland junior B. But yeah, for the most part, I mean, as you mature and you're getting older, you know who the guys are. You learn as you're going along. You learn how to not wake guys up that like to be woken up, and usually create those things. But it was a tough era for sure. Like, these kids don't have to go through that mental preparation of, you want to have a good game, you want to skate well, you want to finish your checks, and they've got 5 guys over there that are just absolutely frothing at the mouth to maybe get in your bench. Or you go into Sudbury. I remember we were talking earlier, so they had Coupel, Simon Sherry, and the list just went on and on and on, and they were just a tough group. And I remember Pat Barton and I were talking and looking at videos a while back, and that was my first game. It was in Sudbury with Guelph. And you're older, and I jumped over a crowd of guys, and who did I grab? Simon Sherry. It just happened to be the toughest guy. So it's just like, he had gone after Jeff Williams behind the net, and I didn't even realize this when it was happening, but he went after Jeff, who I was a line mate with at the time, and there was a bit of a scrum, and I dive over it, grab Simon Sherry, and you get up against the glass, and you're like, when you're going to the box, that's your oh shit moment, right? Like, because you're going to come out of the box and you got to pay the piper. So it's it's just an intimidating game. It was you had to be prepared for it mentally and physically. Whereas now, I think the kids, they just go out and play, and they just worry about their own skill set and what they need to do, and play hard.
When you look back at videos from those days, I saw a couple on YouTube too before we started chatting here today. What do you think of yourself as that young hockey player?
I'm happy. Like I told you before, there's regrets. I had so much skill that you look at, it was just, and I talked about confidence before, and I just couldn't figure out in a couple of years there how to put it all together. And like O'Neill would always tell me, it's not what you want to hear, but you have it in practice, just being able to do things at a higher level than most people. But it's getting it into the game. It's having the confidence and getting the ice time to play with the players that can have that success. So I don't regret anything. I did what I needed to do as a kid. I was passionate. Like I told you, I was a big fan, and that probably got me most of where I got. It's that passion. You can give up easy. I've seen a lot of guys, when the going gets tough, they give up. And so I'm proud of that. I never gave up. And yeah, sure, I wish, I wish I did things a little bit differently and got to stay in the Sioux. The team that drafts you is generally the most loyal team to you. And they, once that's gone, and at a really young age, that's when the bouncing around starts. You've got draft picks every year that come in. And so the fight started right away to try and stay on a club and find a family that you can contribute to. And that was ended up being Guelph at the end, which was a good ending, to be honest with you.
I've got a real soft spot for the Sioux. I'm not really sure why, but great people up there. I've loved everything the organization has done, certainly in my time in the league. Do you ever get back up, see a game there?
I have never been since 19, except for going back there with Guelph, I guess. So the last time I was there would have been 95. But
okay.
You're 100% right. It was a very unique place. If any parent today had a son get drafted there, I would encourage them to go all day long. It was a place like no other. Like when you're a Greyhound, it would be like being a Leaf. It's you're treated first class. The billet families were rich in history. It was a community within a community. Being a Greyhound, I just wish I got to experience it more than the 4 or 5 months that I was up there.
And in that brief time, Ted Nolan was your coach. We didn't really get into that a whole lot. Do you take anything away from him in that brief time?
He was just so classy. He was, it's all the things you heard. He was a player's coach, and Danny Flynn, who I've heard referenced, was, they were a great team. Danny was very technical. Ted did know how to get the most out of you. I heard Tony would have a lot more experience with Ted than I did, but Ted cared about his players. He had personal, like he was friends with those guys, a lot of those older guys in that team. And he was a legend. I remember when I met him at the draft and to get my picture taken with him. But he always came around and talked to everybody. Kind of like how I talked about Craig, and nobody was bigger like Ted. He would talk to me, and kind of what made me feel really good was I saw Ted in Guelph the few years later, and it was he went out of his way. We talked. We were on the rail at the arena before the game, and it just kind of brought things back to, it's not personal. It's they were trying to win a Memorial Cup. A couple of us went that way. They brought in two of the best players in the league, and they won it in Chad Penny and Wade Gibson. But it's he's so iconic, Ted, that you wish you were a part of his that journey with him as a coach. So yeah, it took me some time to get over that.
You talk about just being there on the rail, having a chat with Ted Nolan. It just makes me think of the reference you made earlier to doing some scouting with the Guelph Storm. What's it like for you being in a rink today?
Yeah, so that it was about 10 years ago, and I was talking with Mike Kelly, who's just been phenomenal with me and my family all the years past 95. Even when he went to Windsor, I'd stop in for a coffee in his office in Windsor, and he'd ask how you're doing, and you're also proud to tell him, I'm doing well, and my son's doing well at the time, and my daughter was on her way. And so a few years went by. Mike came back to Guelph, and I said, Mike, I'm working in Michigan permanently now. I'm commuting with the company I used to work for, and I was like, I'm just sitting in my hotel room. I'm going to restaurants. I'd love to spend some more time in the rink. So he got me all hooked up with the computer program. I got the coat and the clipboard. It's a pretty funny story, actually, my first game that I did down there. So I go down, super pumped. Just, I'm down there, I'm working. I'm going to go watch a couple games. So I go watch CompuWare, Major Bantams. And I'm like, Jesus, this one kid's just flying around. And it's like, I think I found like a diamond in the rough here. And so I'm watching. I come back. And later on, I didn't realize, like, Mike watches 400 or 500 games a year. Like, he's seen every player a number of times. So he was kind of teaching me. It's like, you can't really evaluate a player till you've seen and taken some notes, 3, 4, 5 times, and then you compare your notes. And I found that really interesting going through that process. So, anyways, a few months later, I'm at the Silver Stick in Whitby, and this kid that I had saw is called up to the minor midget CompuWare team. I go over to the rink. I'm all pumped up to see this kid that I had been watching down in Michigan. Well, the arena at Iroquois Park in Whitby was about 3 rows deep, and it was the defenseman Sean Day, and that was the player. And Mike to say, yeah, it wasn't hard for you to notice how good he is. He's probably going to be an exceptional status player. So Mike had a laugh at it. But I thought that Wednesday or Tuesday night I was down in Michigan. I was like, wow, I think I got one here. So it's pretty funny. But there is scouting's tough. I give Washer a lot of credit. It's like I said, the skill level of all the kids across the whole lineup. They're all super talented. They're toe dragging. They can shoot. They can score. I think it would have been much easier to identify players in my era and when you were watching. I mean, he's a tough guy. He's a goal scorer. He's a stay-at-home defenseman. He gets the puck off the glass and out regularly, and that's the type of you know what I mean. So there were those characters in the game were very easy to identify, and you could select one where you needed to fill that gap.
It's great to hear that reference to Mike Kelly and how he kind of took care of you, so to speak. Still can be in touch. You want to do some scouting, I'm going to hook you up. I got to know Mike a lot better his second time through Guelph, and I have nothing but great things to say about the guy. And now it makes me think, we talk about these coaches, Dave, with Nolan to Templeton to Hartsburg. Sherry Basson as an executive in the Sioux, Mike Kelly an executive in Guelph. You didn't do too bad on that department either.
No, I've experienced the greatest of the game. And a couple comments more about Craig, but Sherry had, that brief time I was there, we had an early road trip going through my hometown of Oshawa. Was really unique. Sherry cared a lot. He made sure you got time with your family and everybody could come down to the bus after, and we ate at the Bass and the Hound. I believe he had his own restaurant right down by the 401, and we'd have team meals there, and he'd get us, we'd all take all of our own dishes in after, and he's just it was just kind of like a family. And he let us use his restaurant. He was great to everybody, and he was a legend from what he had accomplished in Oshawa and Sault Ste. Marie. It's kind of like a Scotty Bowman, some of these guys, what they accomplished at the junior levels. And Craig, though, to finish off with those guys, is just I've never met anybody, and all the coaches that I had, they're all great in their different ways. But Craig was the preparation that went into that season on a daily basis. I had never been a part of something like that, where it was just every single day there was intensity. We'd have fun when we wanted to have fun, but for the most part, there was a plan every week, down to every day. And everybody bought in, but there was a ton of respect, as there is for all those coaches. But Guelph was just a unique year. And Craig on Facebook and messaging, Mike Kelly, his whole family, and Jim Rooney was one of the owners there at the time. Close-knit group still after all these years. It's pretty cool.
If we were to take the championship season out of the equation for obvious reasons, because it's going to bias you that much, did you have a favorite stop along the way in terms of even the location you were playing in at the time?
Yeah, there's been a lot, as you know, Mike. But I guess to answer that, there'd be different spots for different reasons. When you have success on the ice, your whole outlook on everything is different. So you're happy off the ice, you're happy on the ice. San Antonio was one of those years. I was 20, turning 21, having a riot on the ice. Grew up we had a bunch of young guys there. We played golf every day. You go down to the Riverwalk. It's a really cool park. It's a major city with a minor league hockey team, so that was a lot of fun. And Memphis and Phoenix were another couple cities they have major league sports teams, and but yet a minor league hockey team. So they were, you go down to Beale Street, or if you Old Scottsdale and Phoenix, you're pretty lucky to be able to experience that stuff. But I'd say the Guelph is my home today. From the junior stops, and I see the uniqueness of the Sioux. I wish I had more time there, but Guelph's great. It's right down the road from Toronto. It's got its own identity, and I felt like I've been a part of the Storm family since the day it ended. So you go, and Todd and Jeff's jerseys are retired, and we get alumni events. We get together. So there's a lot of great guys that are in still town, Andrew Long and Brian Wilsey, and so it's a really tight knit group.
I know you've got a run to get to, and I'm pointing that out because I want to be shamed publicly about this. I was chirping you just before we got started on this. You said, I'm on a road with a business trip, but I'm still going for a run before our dinner. Before you do that, what keeps you busy these days, Dave? What are you up to?
So it's a great, we've been in rinks for the last 10 years with both kids, and it's kind of died down. COVID kind of put everything to a halt. My son was even just playing some junior B and junior C recently. So he's on a path. He owns a construction company and at Conestoga College. My daughter, Kiara, who we've been extremely busy with, she's a team candidate cyclist for road and velodrome and the track. So we were in Israel in August, watching her at the World Junior Championships. And then she went on to Sydney, Australia for the road World Junior Championships. So we're pretty busy with her cycling career. And she got a scholarship down to Brevard, North Carolina. So she had to defer. She'll start there. We'll take her down in January. Other than that, I like a lot of guys, trying to work on maybe a helpless, but a passion for golf. So that season's coming to an end. So we keep pretty busy doing that. And yeah, it's slowed down a little bit with I miss the hockey. I miss going to the rinks and the minor hockey kind of start up to the season, the early bird tournaments and whatnot. I miss that a lot.
Yeah, I feel the same way. So we're just having this conversation, getting back into a new season, and it's a season that feels normal because, you know, we're going to play Eastern Conference teams this year, and you're going to see all the other teams in the league, and there aren't any COVID protocols, at least not yet, knock on some wood, but there is something special to that rhythm when a hockey season starts, that's for sure.
I don't know what it is. There's a switch, there's a smell in the air, Labor Day weekend. It's kind of like close your pool, the leaves are going to turn, and I love it. It's my favorite time of year. You got all kinds of sports going on, and I wish the NHL kind of started a little bit earlier. It's a long preseason to kind of, you got other sports to keep you going, but it's it's an exciting time of year. I miss it. That's what I really miss is when we were kids, your rep tryouts for, I remember it was AA and Whitby, were in the fall. So you just went all summer, and then you'd have that Labor Day tryouts, and then you go right into a season with your new team, where they do everything in the spring now. But it was just kind of that trigger point. You'd get so excited all summer to start that winter hockey season. It's a good time of year.
I missed you by about 5 years or so in Guelph. That was my first broadcasting stop, and it wasn't long after you were playing there. This has been so much fun, though, catching up with you. Really appreciate you, Dave, making time for us on this podcast. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, Mike, thanks for reaching out. It was an honor. It was great to talk about some old stories, and I'm really glad, and looking forward to following out all your other podcasts with all the guys.
Next time that the Rangers are in Guelph and you're there, just barge right into that broadcast booth. Okay, there's no security. You just come right on and say, "Hey, I'm Dave Lylyk, and I want to talk to that Farwell guy."
I'm going to take you up on that, and I will get down to some games for sure.